Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to be sensitive to everyone's time today. My name is Faustine Chan. I'm the Business Innovation Manager for BBB. So I've been helping coordinate all these webinars that we are bringing to you from BBB just to help your business stay focused during this time. We really want to connect with our business community just to make sure that you do have the resources to navigate your business during what we're experiencing right now. We have a great speaker today. We have Tracy Bullock. She brings 30 years of business development and experience to her Sandler training business. I know personally she's been nominated for numerous awards around the Valley too for her business and also her leadership in the community as a woman. And a business leader. She builds and delivers Sandler programs to companies of all sizes. She's worked with Procter & Gamble and customer business development, sales and management teams, and grew individuals' performances across department strategic planning with top consumers in the US and globally. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Tracy. Take over.
Thanks, Faustine. Really appreciate the introduction and wanted to make sure that as we go along, I set the stage on what we're trying to accomplish and how I can help give back during a time of extreme uncertainty for businesses of all sizes, because we're all having to learn to adjust and really understand what's next. One of the biggest issues we're facing as we speak is the whole concept of keeping our business going and managing our folks during this concept of social distancing, whether that be stay at home, whether it's parents trying to work themselves from home while they try to school their own children. But I wanted to make sure that as we finish today, I add value in a couple ways. So this is only the first of 4 sessions I've built all around navigating our businesses virtually. Today is all about managing technology to your advantage. So many of us have been on technology to manage our businesses, but maybe not necessarily owned how to make it happen. On Friday, which we'll review at the end of our session today, we're going to talk about how do you hold an effective meeting with your teams internally and with your clients. If there's enough interest through the BBB, Faustine and I will we'll schedule again the last 2 sessions, which is how do you engage with people, make sure that you keep them focused and engaged both in business and in their teams as you go through, and what does that coaching look like from a virtual environment, what behaviors are we looking for. Now, this is only set up for 30 minutes. With that 30 minutes, what I'd like to do is highlight some learning on different web platforms, some tips and tricks, and some epic fails that I've made, and hopefully you won't fall into. Now, I'm going to be highlighting Zoom meeting because, number one, we're on Zoom meeting, but it's also my favorite of the 3 different meeting platforms that are out there and very prevalent in the market: Zoom, GoToMeeting, and WebEx. Now, after this meeting, if you have an interest in my help with a different platform, just reach out, because I've used all 3 extensively. Zoom just happens to be the one that I have chosen on my platform. Now, most of us have joined any kind of virtual meeting as a participant, or maybe we've hosted, but we've done it from a different perspective, right? So today is all about learning some pieces that are important as you think about how to kick these off, what's involved in planning, because it's all about getting some desired results out of spending the time together. And as we all have found out, either the hard way or we already knew, working virtually is a blessing in disguise for some people and a real pitfall for others. So the first thing I want to do is talk about how you set up how you appropriately set up a meeting. So if you think about it, right up here as you're scheduling a meeting, we want to talk about what the topic is. You always want people to understand what is the purpose of what we're doing. How long is it going to last? And is this going to be a recurring meeting? Now, there's a difference between why we'd want something to be a reoccurring meeting, and why we wouldn't. So if we had a meeting set up on a regular basis with a client, so maybe a weekly touch point or a twice a month get together, we wouldn't necessarily want to send it as a reoccurring meeting. We'd want to send it as a calendar invite set up for that time, because it lets us engage in two different ways twice, right? Once with the invite and once with the calendar invite. We also want to make sure we're in the right time zone. Now, I talked of epic fails. Faustine mentioned that I worked with Procter & Gamble for 30 years. And for 7 of those years, I worked in a global management leadership function. Now, that meant that I had to get up at 2 in the morning sometimes to run programs for our Asian countries, right? So our Asian brethren. And if I didn't have my time zone set correctly to Arizona, as I tried to work backwards on when that would look like for them, sometimes I had them getting up at 2 in the morning versus me. So understanding that your time zone needs to be set to the appropriate state is important. Sounds silly, but I had some very unhappy people. When you have a video, well, we all have videos, but if you hit host on and participants on, what happens is that each person who pops on the screen, their face or a little diagram of a body shows up. What happens when you have video on, it is a lot more engaging and you do get to see who you're talking to. The downside of it is it slows the entire program down significantly. In a time when we are facing students at home working on the internet, students at home gaming, everybody at work working from home and needing the internet, you can see how programs themselves might stall or fail if we're trying to do both a video feed and an audio feed, sharing a program at the same time. So just like Faustine did today, my default is always video off for both the host and the participants. Many times I'll turn my video on to say hello to people, but I won't necessarily leave it on throughout the whole training program. I'll show you in some slides coming up how you can actually see who is talking, what they look like, and have a sense of putting a name to a face and a voice together. But that's in some slides that coming up. I just want to make sure we set up correctly. As far as setting up your audio, again, we're set up for both telephone and computer audio today. And I typically, that would be my default also, because many people that I train are out on the road and I don't want them to miss the opportunity to sign in. However, Zoom just sent out a note to everyone who is a Zoom, not a free Zoom participant, but a paid Zoom participant, that computer audio going forward, at least through the next few weeks, would be the most effective way for us to communicate, because it eliminates them having to have multiple channels open for each of the meetings. And then last but not least, I always select a calendar. Now, Outlook happens to be Outlook and Google are probably the most used calendars out there. Most people have their Outlook set to their iCal or their Google set to their Outlook, etc. But use one or the other to make sure that automatically anybody who registers for a meeting or schedules a meeting has the option to put it on their calendar. I am also going to recommend in this instance that you set it up for a calendar invite like this. You also have the option to copy the meeting schedule and send out a physical invite yourself to all the participants with the link attached, so that you have a double check on coming through company mail on the calendar invite and signing up through the Zoom technology and putting it on the calendar themselves. It eliminates any of those, geez, I forgot about the meeting concepts. let's talk a little bit about meeting etiquette. So there is such a thing as personal presence. I spend a lot of time in my Sandler business talking about personal presence and its importance to our personal brands, how we show up with people, and that first, call it 30-second impression. When video cameras are on, you can see quickly that there might be a problem. If you're stuffing your face and people can see you, it's one thing to have a lunch meeting and you call it a lunch meeting, everybody can see each other, everybody's eating. It's a whole nother thing to have a virtual meeting going on and you think to yourself, I'll put myself on mute so they don't hear me chew, but I'm gonna eat. Well, you can see what happens. One of my clients told me that last Friday, somebody posted a picture of themselves on Facebook doing virtual meetings without clothes on. Now, I'm sorry, that's not professional, nor is it appropriate, but nor do anybody want to see it. So whether or not you're Charlie Sheen in a bathrobe with a ciggy and your sunglasses on, or whether you're a guy shoving a sandwich in your face, dress appropriately, or at least with what's agreed to as the, let's call it your business attire for working at home. I'm going to talk about backgrounds in a second, but I do want to focus on the center picture. On the center picture is a woman working at a workstation that works for her. Many, let's call them purists of virtual training, would tell you that this very busy sweater may get lost. The message may get lost because if she is on full screen, people would be focusing on how busy the sweater is versus, and the window in the background, what's there versus what she's talking about. But in my mind, it's the best of the pictures I've chosen here. And last but not least, if you have a comment, raise your hand. What that allows you to do is let the speaker and the host know if there's a question or a comment you want to make, or if you'd like to stop what's happening to go back and recapture a question. We already saw, although we are all muted, we already saw the opportunity to mute and unmute your mic. And in smaller meetings and smaller venues, again, I have it set up as I showed you here, that everybody will be muted coming in, but they can either unmute themselves or I can unmute everybody and ask people to raise their hands to speak so that we don't have a lot of people talking over each other. Now that goes a little bit in the face of making sure people feel engaged during a meeting, but we have no elements of communication that we can rely on here because we can't see somebody physically, so we can't see the body language of, oh, I've got a question. We want to make sure that the tonality is right. And a lot of times we'll need to repeat the question or ask somebody to repeat something in a different way. And common courtesy, which we learned way back in kindergarten all the way through grade school, would be to raise your hand in order to be both recognized and to take your turn in sharing. As a leader of a meeting, as a host of the meeting, it's also our responsibility to take a look at all of the participants on the meeting and make sure that we hear from each participant and that we are getting their opinions. So we work with a lot of different kind of communication styles. If you think of DISC, if you think of colors, any kind of behavioral or communication, or some people call it personality assessment. Some people are very reserved in sharing, and some people are very verbose. And without seeing people, the folks who are more active communicators or more direct and to the punch may overpower a meeting unless, as a host, you learn to control that. So in order to be a good host, I want to talk a little bit about advanced party planning, meaning what are some advanced options we can make in Zoom meeting, which also are available in GoToMeeting and WebEx, that invite people into your business if they're your clients, or invite your team into a space where not only they can wait together, but they also have the ability to visit while they're there. Because remember, we are inviting them into our workplace, whether it's virtual or whether it's physical, every time we ask somebody to join us on a meeting. You can see how I do not mute participants on entry for this particular example. You can, for instance, Faustine set me up as an alternative host. So all she has to do is share the ability for me to be able to host this meeting. But it also keeps you from having to stumble around to share presentation abilities back and forth between people on the meeting. So if indeed 2 or 3 people are going to be presenting during your meeting, let's say we're talking to a client and there are 2 or 3 people on your team that have different parts to play in the presentation, you would want to set them up as alternative hosts. And that way, it's very easy to say who's going to host now. So switching host would be very, very easy versus having to type something in or going from there. Additionally, many times we forget, because as we go out in the market to present, as we think about how we like to control presentations and maybe want to make sure that the presentation flows the way that we would like it to, we have to keep in mind that the delivery mode, the communication process, the tools we're using have changed drastically from what they did 2 or 3 weeks ago. So now when you think about how you want to share information, there are 3 things I want to talk about here, and each of them have pros and cons. Pre-reading. A lot of times we hesitate to send out pre-reading for fear that somebody's going to cancel our meeting because they quote unquote got the information they needed when you sent the stuff out. In a virtual environment, you might want to make sure that not only do they, well, you always want to make sure they know what the topic is, but you also want to make sure that they understand, here are the couple things that we're going to want your input on, and here are a couple things that we want to make sure we chat about. Let's talk about slideshow and videos. So from a slideshow view, if I were to pick share screen right here, it's green, so it allows me to share screen. This screen right here is what pops up. And it gives me 3 options: basic, advanced, and files. Now I'm going to focus on the basic first. So for instance, I have a PowerPoint presentation open. It happens to be this one, or this is one for next week, but it happened to be, let's say, this PowerPoint presentation. I can choose to show anything that I can see in a multi-screen view on my computer. So I only want to have open the things I would want, number 1, everybody to see, number 2, the things I'm ready to share. So in this instance, if I pick this presentation, all I have to do is press share and it comes up. The only thing to remember in a PowerPoint presentation is you also want to put it in full screen mode, so in presentation mode. That way you don't get all the slide notes as demonstrated here. Another very cool tool for both internal meetings with your teams and your companies, as well as with customers as follow-up steps, is as you hit the share screen, in basic, what pops up is another concept called a whiteboard. And with a whiteboard, you can actually type notes, you can annotate them, you can assign them to people, so you can walk away with action steps right away using tools that are available to every single person. The second tab I want to talk about in the share screen mode would be one called Files. So again, I would go to share screen, the green arrow, and I would click on files. There are many files that we want to pass back and forth to people, give people access to on the spot, and or too big to open and keep resident on your computer that you could open right here from either Dropbox, Google Drive, or Microsoft OneDrive. But I wanted to make sure you knew that you do not have to, at any given time, keep gigantic files open that you think would slow down the performance of your computer. Now, one thing I also wanted to show you before I left meeting etiquette and before we quit sharing is I want to show you a concept of backgrounds. So let's say we are in construction or a manufacturer in the Arizona market, and I want to highlight what I do for a living. So I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to make my own virtual background. So how do I control? So this guy sitting down here on the porch, is he really on the porch, or is he just showing that as a background? So what I can do is I can go to start video, and I'll show you this in a second, start video, and I can choose a virtual background. Well, right now you see me, and I am talking in my office, my home office. But let me show you one I built. I built this virtual background with Sandler training behind me and found out that it was distracting and irritating because weird things happen to my fingers, but it also washes me out. And even though it brands me, it doesn't provide a great look. Now, given another background that's actually on the computer is the Northern Lights. Now, while that's very cool, it's also distracting from both the message, from what I'm saying, and the only thing I want to look at is this wavy line thing going on. I guess it's better though, however, than being in the weeds. So as you think about sharing backgrounds or building your own, make sure you know that you've checked it and rechecked it, and you've had other people give you input on it. So again, if I were to want to share a virtual background, if I wanted to show a project in motion or wanted to show me at a project, all you do is press where it says video, you press the up arrow key and says virtual background, and you can add them just like you're adding JPEG files, picture files, etc. But again, you have to make sure they're not detracting from the message or, more importantly, the purpose of a meeting. As we talk about the last part of being a good host, I want to talk a lot about quality control. And I've mentioned some of these things already, but I really want to emphasize what can go wrong when you don't do these things, when things don't go right. I guess that was a silly thing to say, but you get my message. I've already mentioned shutting off all other programs that are resident on your computer. And literally, I shut them down because many of us have Outlook messages that pop up. Some of us, if you have an Apple computer and an Apple phone, your phone call will come up. It will actually ring on your computer. And what that does, everybody might not be able to see it, but it distracts the presenter. It takes away from you being a good host. Because if you're going to be present and you are going to manage the way you would like other people to see you manage if you were sitting face to face, is I am focused on you, and I recognize that in a virtual environment, the ability to pay attention goes way down because things can happen on a regular basis. Video and background test. I just showed you what could happen with a very distracting background. I also showed you what could happen if, I talked about what would happen if you had too many video people in, what happens is you get, looks like checkerboards in a screen, and the more people that join, the smaller the checkerboards, And the more it slows down both the program as well as everybody's individual computers, because it's trying to process the video along with the audio as well as anything that's being shared. I have a couple questions. Let's see here. Oh, thank you, Faustine. I was showing people, if you go into, I'll go back one. Have you talked about, let me close this. This is the third part of sharing that I did leave out because I went back to show you about the backgrounds. But if you're sharing the link in chat, so we talked about slideshow and videos, right? So here would be a video open. We talked about files where you could share gigantic files. The other way that you can share information immediately or let people know you have a question is by hitting the chat button. And in the chat button, you can literally type in or cut and paste a link to any kind of program so every participant can see what's going on. Now, sound and mic quality. Faustine and I actually did a test yesterday about how quickly and how well the presentation slides were coming across. We did a background check. We checked for mic and sound quality. We talked about whether or not participants would be muted or unmuted. And she's monitoring the chat box. I saw that we had a couple of chats, so I went up and looked at them, and they literally were her typing to you guys that the slides would be shared, and if you had any questions, to please let us know by typing in the chat box. So being a good host, just to recap, is making sure people feel welcomed when they enter the program, that they can visit with each other, both from a networking standpoint as well as a who else is attending standpoint. We've talked about setting alternative hosts up because there's nothing more frustrating than stumbling through technology in the midst of everybody else watching you. We've talked about sharing through pre-reading, through basic slide share or files, and we've also talked about how to do that in chat. And we've talked about the importance of checking the quality of both your delivery as well as engagement during the call. But there's one thing that we really haven't spoken a lot about in quality control, and that is practicing. Even though you may have built your slides, and even though you know how to use the technology, without understanding how and when to check different things, understand what you're showing and what you're saying slide by slide, and understanding what etiquette would be for you as a host based on the participants who are there, because know your audience is just as important, if not more important, in a virtual environment as it is when you're face-to-face. Then what you've done is you've gone 90% of the way there and you fail in the actual delivery. And there's nothing worse than putting together a fabulous program, a good presentation, and setting up the meeting well without running through it at least 2 or 3 times with somebody on the other end to check the quality control of delivery. So we've learned how to set up a Zoom meeting, what to wear, when to raise your hand, having the appropriate background, delivery for advanced party planning, meeting, have those options available, know how you're going to share, be very deliberate in telling people how you're going to share and why, and then checking, planning, and practicing as you go through presentations. So with the Better Business Bureau as a wonderful partner for myself personally and for my business, Faustine and I talked about making other resources available. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are going to offer another session on virtual meetings where you actually learn what are the 8 steps to planning a good meeting, and how do you plan a meeting that's different virtually versus one that everybody just shows up in a conference room and you work through the agenda together. So we'll be hosting that Friday, the 27th Same bat time, same bat channel from 1 to 1:30 if you're interested in the second session. Additionally, I asked for and received graciously through Sandler Corporate a block of seats for our management solutions program, and it's all virtual training topics. Anything you can imagine that you may need help with, all you have to do is ask. And Sandler's making them complimentary through May 31st. I'm more than happy to give back in 2 ways: to add you to that group if you're interested, number one, and number two, help you with topics as you think about as they come up. Just pick up the phone and call me. Hey, Trace, I understand this topic, but how do I apply it in this situation? Last but not least, if you link up with me on LinkedIn or even with Sandler Corporate, there's some great articles and blogs on best approaches for engaging with your team, for running business in a virtual environment, and for overcoming concepts like social distancing while we need to keep our businesses afloat and keep food on the table. What I'd like to do, and Faustine, you'll have to help me here figure out how we're going to do it. You can either, well, we're right at time. So if you have questions or concerns, if you have an interest in the complimentary seat of the Sandler Virtual Training Program or need additional help, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is listed there below. It's my name, tracy.bullock, there's no E in Tracy, @sandler.com, or my direct line phone number, which is a 1 number, and you can get me anywhere. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully this has been some help in figuring out step 1 of this new world we find ourselves in a virtual environment. I look forward to talking with you again on Friday. Thank you.